Today we're at the largest British cemetery on the Somme battlefields, Serre Road No. 2, and we're here to tell the stories of some of the men that lay here, and also to tell the story of the fascinating link that this cemetery has to World War II. Today we're back at Serre on the Somme battlefields, just up the road from here by Serre Cemetery No. 1, where thousands of the PALS battalions went into the attack, and we've told that story before. Just up here behind me is the Redan Ridge. Just in this section here, there were about 6,000 casualties on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. That's about 10% of the total casualties from that day. Here at Serre Road No. 2, we have the largest British cemetery on the Somme battlefields. Now, after the attacks here on the 1st of July, the front lines were largely unchanged due to this being very much a failed attack on the 1st of July, the first day of the Battle of the Somme. That meant that thousands of men laid out in no man's land, and in a lot of cases, those bodies weren't able to be retrieved for months. In fact, it wasn't until May 1917 that this cemetery here was established, when British troops were able to move forwards and start to clear areas of the battlefield here in this area after the Germans had pulled back as part of their retreat to the Hindenburg Line. Of course, by that stage, some of the bodies had laid out here in no man's land for months, meaning that in a lot of cases, the bodies that were retrieved weren't identified. So here we have the huge Serre Road No. 2 cemetery. Today there's more than 7,000 burials here, but that wasn't the case immediately when this cemetery was established. So in February 1917, the German army left their positions here along the Redan Ridge and over in the village of Serre. They'd held this ground since September 1914, and this cemetery here was then established as that battlefield started to be cleared. Initially there were about 475 soldiers brought here and buried. After the armistice, there were another various kind of local and smaller cemeteries that were brought in here to create this larger central cemetery. And as the clearance of the battlefields continued, remains of more than 6,500 British and Commonwealth dead were discovered and then reburied here at the Serre Road No. 2. That brings us to today, where there are 7,127 burials here. And incredibly, almost 5,000 of those are unidentified. Now look, just think about those numbers for a second. Just over 7,000 burials here, and nearly 5,000 of those are unidentified. That really is so much of the tragedy of this war. All of these young men, in most cases young men, buried here at Serre Road No. 2. Thousands of the guys who are buried here will be named on the Thiepval Memorial to the missing. Their families won't necessarily know that they are here. They will have a name on the Thiepval Memorial, when in reality they might be laying right here, and we will just never know. 5,000 of just over 7,000 soldiers here, unidentified. Now, just to turn our attention away from Serre Road No. 2 for 1 second, if we look out in this direction, we are looking out towards the French cemetery here at Serre, and then Serre Road No. 1 just beyond it, places where we've been a couple of times. Now, interestingly, this area here is where Wilfred Owen served with the 2nd Battalion of the Manchester Regiment, and he spent some time here in a captured German bunker in January 1917. During his time here in January 1917, 1917, Wilfred Owen wrote to his mother, and in that letter he talked about some of the experience he'd had here, the hours of agony in the mud and inside the bunker. And in that letter he talked about an experience that he saw of a sentry being blown down the steps during a bombardment. That soldier was blinded by the blast, and the incident is thought to have inspired Owen's poem later that year, The Sentry. So Wilfred Owen's poem, The Sentry, thought to have been inspired by his experiences just out here ahead of us. There we herded from the blast of whiz-bangs, but one found our door at last, buffeting eyes and breath, snuffling the candles, and thud, flump, thud, down the steep steps came thumping and splashing in the flood. Deluging muck, the sentry's body, then his rifle, handles of old Bosch bombs, and mud in ruck on ruck. We dredged him up for killed, until he whined, "Oh, sir, my eyes, I'm blind, I'm blind, I'm blind." Wilfred Owen's poem, The Sentry, inspired by his experience just here by Serre. Now, also as we look out in this direction, when we glance across, we see this little memorial here. Let's go take a look and tell a bit of the story about what that's there for. Now, just outside the cemetery, we have this memorial here. Now, this is dedicated to Lieutenant Valentine Braithwaite, MC, who served in the 1st Battalion of the Somerset Light Infantry. On the first day of the Somme, his battalion had attacked the Quadrilateral Redoubt, which is roughly in this area now, and they suffered severe casualties. Braithwaite himself was killed and his body was never recovered, but he is commemorated on the Thiepval Memorial. Lieutenant Valentine Braithwaite, MC, so the recipient of the Military Cross. His memorial here by Serre Road No. 2. Now, as we head out and walk through the cemetery itself, you can really see how many thousands of graves here there are, and of course we know there's more than 7,000. Now, quite often when you come to these cemeteries, you see rows and rows of symmetrical headstones. And sometimes you'll see a plot that's a bit different. Maybe they're at different spacing or different distances apart or a different angle. And in a lot of cases, not necessarily all, but in a lot of cases that tells us that that was the original burial plot. And the original burial plot here at Serre Road No. 2 is out here in the middle ahead of us. Let's go check it out. So as I say, when we look out ahead of us here, we can see thousands of headstones, symmetrical, row after row, all exactly the same. But then here in the middle, we have this plot here, which is at a different angle. It's not straight on like all the rest. You can see the spaces are slightly different, some very close together, and then some uneven spacing. And that's because this is the plot for the original burials here at Serre Road No. 2. So here in this plot, we have the headstones of men like Corporal W.J. Wynne of the Middlesex Regiment, killed on the 13th of November 1916, aged 26. So he was killed here in the attack right towards the end of the Battle of the Somme that went through this area and across towards Beaumont Hamel on the 13th of November. Right next to him, sandwiching each end of the Battle of the Somme, we have Lance Corporal J.A. Hume of the Seaforth Highlanders, killed in this area on the 1st of July 1916. So the beginning of the Battle of the Somme and right at the end of the Battle of the Somme. Here in the original plot at Serre Road No. 2. Now, here amongst the thousands of British headstones, we also have some Germans buried here. So here we've got a couple of German graves of unknown German soldiers. So these would be German soldiers who had probably been discovered here in the battlefield during the clearance and buried here at the cemetery. In and amongst unknown British soldiers, so just next to them we have a soldier of the Great War, unknown Lance Corporal. So actually that might not necessarily be a British soldier, but just next to them there would be a soldier of the Great War. So he was identified as being from the East Surrey Regiment, probably part of his uniform or his shoulder insignia, something like that. And literally amongst them, a couple of German graves. Now, as we've said, there's thousands of headstones here at Serre Road No. 2, but there's one story which jumped out at me a little bit, which I wanted to tell you about. So here we have the headstone of Private H. Birtles, that's Herbert Birtles, of the 21st Battalion of the Manchester Regiment, killed on the 29th of August 1916. Now, originally Herbert Birtles was listed as missing. He was one of those thousands of men named on the Thiepval Memorial. Now, in fact, his name is still on the Thiepval Memorial, on the Manchester panels. But when that panel is next replaced, they do that on the Thiepval Memorial. When a panel needs to be refurbished, they will replace it, and they will update it by removing soldiers that have since been found. And Herbert is one of those men. He was brought in from the cold. His body was found along with another soldier a little bit south of Delville Wood. That was actually back in the 1930s. And both soldiers were reinterred here at Serre Road No. 2. So thousands of unidentified soldiers here, but at least there's one who we have a name for. So the next man we're going to talk about here at Serre Road No. 2 is Corporal Benjamin Morris Leach. Now, he's not actually buried here at the cemetery, but his story gives us an incredible link to World War II. So I wanted to tell it whilst I was here. So Benjamin Leach served in France during the First World War with the Manchester Regiment. After the war, he returned here to this area to work. He was employed as a gardener with the Imperial War Graves Commission, as it was called at the time, now the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And he worked as the gardener right here at Serre Road No. 2. Now, during the Second World War, of course, France and this area was occupied by the Germans. But Benjamin Leach was allowed to continue with his work, possibly because the Germans just thought it was harmless to be here and tend the graves, possibly because there were some German graves here, as we've already talked about. But nonetheless, he was allowed to innocently carry on with his work here at the cemetery. Little did the Germans know, he was actually doing another vitally important role whilst he was here. So during the Second World War, Benjamin Leach worked here, tending to this cemetery at Serre Road No. 2. And in fact, this was the tool shed. This was where he kept his tools and popped in and out of during his working day. But was it just his tool shed? No, it wasn't. In fact, it was something much more important. During the Second World War, Ben Leach was an active member of those groups who were engaged in the secret and dangerous work of smuggling out and repatriating Allied airmen who had been shot down over Northern Europe. Many of the men that he smuggled out of France hid in this tool shed during their time here. He would bring them here, hide them away in the tool shed. You can kind of see it's kind of discreet. It's out sort of behind the cemetery. Maybe the Germans didn't even know it was here. And if they did, they certainly didn't suspect what he was up to. So Ben Leach would hide those downed airmen there in the tool shed and then hand them on to the French resistance, who would smuggle them out of France, hopefully eventually back to England. Now, if you guys like myself have seen Masters of the Air, we've kind of seen that sort of depicted with the airmen who were downed in Belgium in that series. So incredibly dangerous work that Ben Leach was doing here, alongside the vitally important work of maintaining these graves. You know, if the Germans had found out about that, him and his family likely would have been shot, executed. But he carried on that essentially dangerous work, and who knows how many lives he saved in doing that. After World War II, various other members of the Leach family also worked with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. It was clearly a labour of love for that family, working in cemeteries like this. Now, if you're here in the Somme area, I'd urge you to come here to Serre Road No. 2. This is one of the cemeteries that I actually don't see visited as often. Just up the road, we have Serre Road No. 1. Of course, that's right next to Sheffield Memorial Park. You have the grave of Horace Iles there, which is visited because it's a more famous story, right? People like myself have made that happen by putting it on YouTube. So people like to visit those kind of graves first. Here at Serre Road No. 2, you might not necessarily have those kind of more famous individual stories, but it's important to come to a cemetery like this, even if you just spend 10 minutes walking up and down and taking in the size of the cemetery. Head up to the back, have a look at the hut there so you can learn a little bit more about the story and just kind of think about what happened and the importance of the work that Ben Leach did here at Serre Road No. 2. But if you get a chance, come here. Walk around and take a look at the largest British cemetery on the Somme. So I hope you guys enjoyed the stories here from Serre Road No. 2, the largest British cemetery here on the Somme. More than 7,000 men buried here at Serre Road No. 2. Hope you also enjoyed the cemetery's fascinating link to World War II. This cemetery is incredible in itself. So many soldiers here, so many stories. But that story and the link to World War II is incredibly fascinating. And I wanted to include it into the video here. If you did enjoy the video, do me a favour, do all the YouTube stuff right here on the screen. It helps me out loads and loads. If you'd like to consider supporting the channel, you can do that via my Patreon page. That's linked in the description below. In the meantime, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'm going to see you on the next video.